Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bonny Lightfoot from Alren Farm, Stoke Kinsland. Welcome to our community session. I have with me Martin Howlett and Rob Halliday. I will first start with my slides. Alren Farm is run by my family team, Tim as lead, Jake our son and myself. Without Tim and Jake's support, I would not be able to pursue other voluntary positions. Thank you. We run a self-sustained suckler herd of beef pedigree Charolais and arable units. Alren Farm is rented from the Duchy of Cornwall. We have private landlords on Grass Keep and the rest is family owned. All our best young heifers are put to Aberdeen Angus bull for ease of calving in their first year and then subsequently to pedigree Charolais bull. All the rest of the steers and heifers are finished on a barley, wheat, oats bean mix with kale and fodder beet also. Supplying finished cattle to Dunley, our slaughterhouse. The end product goes to M&S, Lidl and Costco. All feed is homegrown to produce award-winning beef steaks. Our aim is to improve soils, lower costs through reduction of fertiliser, create more carbon sequestration by growing more clover-rich herbal maize within our arable min-till rotational system. Our soils are shallow and loamy, and we have a number of fields which are steep and water can flow off the fields and enter into Lucket Stream. We use a sward lifter kindly supplied by FIPO, Tamar Valley. This machine is used by our members of the parish farming cluster group to slow the flow of water into the Lucket Stream. This also stops surface water runoff and soil erosion and the retention of our nutrients within our soils. Our aim is to keep soil nutrients on farm. Water sampling is carried out for citizen science. This subject is one of my ambitions over the last 3 years. In 2021, our neighbours downstream were flooded out, and I helped to arrange a flood forum for our parish and the wider community to attend. Premier Solutions showed householders how to protect their homes. The next stage is to build leaky dams to slow the flow. This has been achieved this year with the help of FIPO in Tamar Valley and my lovely WI ladies who came down one afternoon to build the first 3 leaky dams. An amazing afternoon in the stream with, of course, cake and tea. This is also a benefit for our diversity. We have over 60 kilometres of hedgerows on farm, offering wildlife, habitat and carbon sinks. This is around 110 fields plus, sequestering over 165 tonnes of CO2 per year. To improve carbon, Jake is increasing height and width each year through management. This will increase wildlife on our farm also. Bird life is recorded through the Merlin app. The rare ones captured and seen was the little bunting. Twitchers came from all over the county and country to see him. And the hobby recorded that harvest this year. And red kites followed Jake whilst moving from field to field whilst he was silaging. Moths are also recorded. 74 species including the hummingbird moth and the elephant moth. Amazing creatures to be seen. In conjunction with the cluster group, we have had an ecological survey carried out at the farm to form the baseline for our evidence of improved biodiversity over the years. We have also 1.5 hectares of winter bird feed with sunflowers. Our landlords, the Duchy of Cornwall, planted 30 Cornish fruiting apple, pear and plum trees along the Lucket Stream to encourage more wildlife upstream, alongside 70 broadleaf trees for His Royal Highness's 70th birthday. We're planning to plant more trees and bushes on hedges. A farm WhatsApp group evolved into our climate change group and recently evolved again into our parish facilitation group. WI is a great window to get involved with. At the moment, we're involved with a county competition, Go Wild About Wildlife. This has been a great way to introduce the Merlin app of birds, phone ID of plants, mosses and bugs. A great learning curve for my WI. And of course, involvement in slowing the flow at Alren with leaky dams and looking at also gum bottles, gum up in the air, of course, various sizes and the highlights of the door dung beetle and looking for mites underneath its belly. Not seen any yet. We held an open day on farm for our neighbours to come and see what's involved to reconnect with the community. Tractor rides to see our animals and crops. Not everything's rosy on farm, I said, when we have unknown elements we have to face. It's interesting to have local people here and change their perception of farming. Planting seeds and watching them grow is 2 points I like to make. Lately, we're heavily involved in the facilitation group, which is a great learning curve for all our groups sharing experiences. Ideas, funding, collective solutions, which can be very powerful. Farming, learning from farmers is instrumental, as we have seen from Farm Net Zero. Being able to showcase our work at Real Oxford Conference was a privilege and a highlight for me. Hannah and her team from Farm Net Zero has been a great teacher and has encouraged us to dip our toes in and see what works well. Thank you. Our next speaker is Martin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Martin Howlett. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon, and our title, of course, is Rooted Together. And I suppose probably when we look around the whole room, and know many of you here, it seems a strange subject to be talking about when we are, as farmers, already very much rooted, not only together but within the community, in all that we do in terms of helping village life, community events, and really being that source of information and also hosting so many things that we all do in all various ways. However, we talked today about how we are rooted together, and we start with a picture. I hope you all know that is a chicory in Hurdle Lane, and it's one that he's disappeared now, but Sean was always, Sean from Football, for the football programme, was always very keen and thinks it's a very good analogy that when we look at Hurdle Lane, that really is the much lamented hay meadows of 100 years ago. What we recreate now for all the benefit we have of farming is actually what a hay meadow created all those years ago, again for fuel, this time for feed. And I always put the chicory up there as a prime example of what it is. It is deep rooting, like we all are in farming. We have our roots deep in the community. It's got the opportunity to produce the pollinator, which is the way we spread and feed nature and indeed our communities also. But above all, it sticks head and shoulders above the rest of the crop. And I hope to think that we as farmers still have that pride that we're able to do so. My journey at Deer Park Farm, President. That one's it. Okay. Yeah. My journey at Deer Park Farm has been for the last 40 years heavily involved. We moved to the West Country at the same time as Dutchy College started. We're just up the road, dead road from Dutchy College on the banks of the Tamar. And at that time, that was a brilliant opportunity to start to work together with the local communities, and probably more recently, since the advent of Net Zero and the Farm Carbon Toolkit, that embraced them of what was obviously the big emergencies called the Council declaring the climate emergency, the ecological emergency, and also the NFU declaring that we would meet net zero by 2040. All big challenges in themselves, and I believe that we're all up for them. We're also in the Tamar Valley. I've just finished as the chair of the Tamar Valley Partnership for the last 4 years. With the Tomorrow projects, a real demand or a real desire to be decarbonised within the valley. But it is the work that the farm net zero have done on farm and around along the Stoke Clinton farm cluster that Bonny just mentioned that we can really start to take on that journey of regenerative farming. And it is something that we have done in various ways. Bonny referred to the Slow the Flow project, which of course is very important when we look at water retention on farm and slowing the flow. We all live on the banks on the north side of Kett Hill, and the rainfall, the 16 inches of rainfall we have, comes from falling from the second highest point in Cornwall, 1,100 foot, down to 50 foot River Tamar in a course of a mile. That can do some serious damage in heavy rainfall. So with measures that we've learned, things like this here, which is to put in earth bunds with hedgerows on top, have really started, along the leaky dams, have really started to make a difference. And it's community involvement. So here we've got a picture of some of the groups that come to my farm. We have an education centre on farm, and in this instance, this is a group from North Cornwall who are SEN, that's Special Educational Needs people, and giving them experience on farm on days like that really help them build their confidence, but also get free labour on my part. So it's all good. I'm trying to plant 1,700 trees in a week, it's not that clever. But there we are, a good example. We'll move on again. But school visits also very, very important. We've been hosting school visits ever since 2007, when, let's remind everybody that the previous Labour government, which probably were on side, actually at the time, did actually have the year of food and farming. Lord Curry, formerly of MLC, led that initiative to get every single child onto a farm. And that was a very important initiative that happened, and many of us took the opportunity to start our journeys with visits on farms. And I've done that ever since, probably had between 15 and 20 schools. Many of them come from inner city Plymouth, so they've never been out of Plymouth in their life, let alone onto a farm. And starting at a young age, just explaining, no preaching, no propaganda, nothing, just straightforward explaining what we do on farms is a really important part of the community that we can all do, opportunities to do so, give them the chance to understand where their food comes from, and don't forget they are the parents and consumers of the future. For them to understand that a little bit helps us not only in trying to defend where we are, but also promoting our local produce. And it's something that I'm proud of that we do, and collectively, Bonny and myself and others feel very much that we have the opportunity to, not only with children, but with adults alike, to share that story and understanding with the metrics that we're getting from Carbon Zero to them understand that we are making a difference. We are part of the solution, not the problem alone. I think that's so important that we all take that message back with us. A couple of other things before I move on is that we've had opportunities to share that story. I can picture the summer scene. I think that Roll Call was showing it here a few months back on the regenerative stand that the Cornwall Local Nation Partnership, which also served on, put on for the second year. We had the royal visit. Prince William came on stand, and through the work that, again through Carbon Zero and the Soil Labs, wasn't it, Jake is part of it? Yeah. Jake, I can't remember his surname now, but anyway, very enthusiastic guy, had done some extensive soil sampling, way beyond the traditional soil sampling, to discover that on my farm that we had got one of the best mycelia fungi networks in our herbal days that he'd ever seen outside of ancient woodland. And of course, if you know Jake, I'm sure many of you do, very typical, he was dared to tell Prince William, and of course he did. So of course that was the highlight of that, and we've introduced obviously to royalty, but also for Prince William to say he was very fascinated to see such progress in farming, and he'd like to come and see it. So I think that was a big coup for us all to have Prince William here at Royal Cornwall and take that interest in regenerative farming generally. I think that's about all I'm going to say now, other than the fact we were going to return to that in a minute, but that was our big highlight for not only the group, but also particularly the community, that we were able to share on the initiative of Hannah the Changemakers event back in the autumn on farm, Camden Town Band, 10 professional opera singers, but most importantly, the two local primary schools, Stoke Clinton and Howlett, not only part through their curriculum year, understanding how local farms work and how the the garden journeys happening, but the ability to then be able to perform that on that day. It was a wonderful day. At the end of this session, we're going to display a small section of that. But I would just say that, most importantly, I think that we should be proud of what we all do, and the most important part is that we feel honoured to be and call the place that we call home is our own farms. Thank you.
So apologies, I'm not Roger, for those of you that know who would have realised I'm the not-so-young pretender, Rob, his son. Father apologises he can't be here today, so he's he dropped me in at last minute. Dropped me in it because this is not my area of expertise on the farm. For a bit of context, I farm separately to my parents, set up 17 years ago. I have a county council holding and various other bits and bobs. I farm about 550 acres. And we have a couple of forage wagons as well, do about 2,000 acres a year with those. But again, I am suckler cows, 130 sucklers, 250 ewes. Separate business to my parents, which sounds like we hate each other, but actually we don't. I work day in, day out with mum and dad, but I do very much the farming element. So dad is very much running the environmental side of the farm. They bought the farm in '93. Dad was the land steward for the Duchy of Cornwall and wanted to set up a farm that would remunerate them, but also farm in a way that they felt was right. The farm is 250 acres in the Liner Valley, so just off the edge of Bodmin Moor. It's about 40 acres of wood and waste. We've got 2 streams and about a mile of the liner on the farm. So there's boggy bits and wasty bits and nice, an interesting environment. The grassland's split roughly 50-50 between permanent pasture and sort of herbal lays. We've got some unsown pea barley whole crop, and we also grow some roots for the winter. We've been growing herbal lays for about 30 years alongside lucerne and various other interesting things. 50 suckler cows on the farm, South Devon and Angus, selling everything fat, sort of running up to 30 months, quite low and slow growth. And being organic since 1999. Did have a flock of sheep, but Dad decided that he couldn't bark loud enough and couldn't run fast enough anymore, so he sold them to me. So sheep are introduced as and when I need the adjustment. Hedges. Oh, so actually, just going back, that one there, that's quite, that hedge just across from the farmyard was basically completely gone when we first came to the farm. Some hedges were, I think we had about 80 acres in one field. Most of our fields are now about 5. So there's been an awful lot of work done. We planted 17,000 trees on the farm, predominantly for landscape value. We have 17 kilometres of hedgerows, including all of our internal roads, neighbouring boundaries, and they're mainly Cornish hedges, so a mixture of earth face, stone banks, lots of growth on the top. We've made a good use of capital grants to both put the hedges right that were on the farm, but also to introduce some new hedges. And the one you see there's about 40 acres of that arable and good grassland to the other side of that hedge. And actually it didn't really make sense because the field ran from flat ground into what is down here a steep river valley full of bog at the bottom. So actually quite difficult to manage. I've been pushing more and more in terms of rotational grazing. And the great thing at Browda is the fields are so small I don't need electric fencing. We simply move them around as we go. So actually the hedgerows have provided what we want to try and achieve, which is landscape value, but actually is also to a point that has helped our farm management. So those hedgerow grants have been pretty instrumental to enabling us to create the farm as it now is. We're on a 10 to 15 year laying cycle, done with contractors, we don't get involved with ourselves. Again, with a view to sort of wildlife, landscape, shelter, and some carbon sequestration. We do trim the sides every 2 to 3 years for a couple of reasons. I mean, it does probably distract from the wildlife a little bit, but it saves the cattle from rubbing in the hedges. If a lot of stuff leans over, they tend to rub, lean on the wire, snap the wire, get into the hedges. It saves me spending most of my contract income on wing mirrors, so it enables me to actually farm the farm without too much family stress. I'd describe Browda as a very tidy farm with very scruffy eddies. which I think is probably a slightly reimagined landscape, but certainly seems to work. The arisings from the laying, so obviously we've got the trimmings, but we also have arisings when we lay. We don't lay everything, some of it's pulled out. And we generally stack that in these blocky bits. There's a couple of stacks you can just see there. They don't actually last very long, they soon break down, but until they do, lots of wildlife, good for bugs and beetles. Where we have more productive areas, we will either burn, or Dad's got a log boiler, which is a complete obsession. He spends his entire life either chopping logs, feeding the boiler, servicing the boiler, looking at the RHI payments, which makes him really happy because he works out how much money per log he gets. So trees and logs he's absolutely delighted with. Not a lot gets wasted, it gets used somehow. Deadwood, good deadwood is left in the hedges, again, good habitat. We do have a problem with bracket fungus in beech trees. We have a lot of beech, and we will have to fell those because the root blades are so big they'll actually rip huge great holes out the hedge if they fall over. Hedgerow trees, about 700 on the farm. Again, hoping to get some sort of valuable habitat. And fencing, we do fence the banks because I think if you had just a live hedge, it would probably always protect itself, but unfortunately when you've got an earth bank underneath it, they'll get in, rub that out and collapse the hedge, so we do, everything's fenced. We have, just in the last 2 years, started moving to Clipex, arguably a bit less sightly, but actually it does soon tone down. The big benefit, as you can see here, very wet, can't access it with a post banger. So it's been pretty handy just in terms of a bit more longevity in the life of the posts. And actually in terms of cost, it's so much quicker to put up that it's, although the materials are more expensive, hopefully we won't be revisiting it too often. Costs, funding is absolutely key. Laying costs about £10 a metre every 12 years. Hedge cutting is only 10% of that, so grants are absolutely crucial. We cannot afford to continue to manage the hedges as we do, unless the grant funding. Yes, there is a potential opportunity cost in terms of we lose about 10 acres of land, but actually by the time we take the SFI and the hedgerow management payments, we are actually better off than we are beef farming those small areas. In terms of carbon, about 25% of our sequestered carbon is in the hedgerows, so there's certainly some environmental benefits. And just to finish up, not on the slide, but the reason I sort of scene set from my own point of view and my tendency farming business, the title of this section is Connecting People, and I think we have to connect the politicians like Will and various others have been and continue to be fairly heavily involved in the interview. Politicians, you're either at the table or on the menu, so I think we have to continue to put our best case forwards. None of this would happen now because of where government policy is. It's not something we can achieve in the modern era. Back in the late 90s, early noughties, there was an awful lot more payment for doing this sort of things. And on our tenanted farm, I very much have to drive production because fundamentally we don't have the length of tenancy that enables these, which are almost getting to the point of being multi-generational in their nature. We don't have the tendency and the government support to do these things. And interestingly, I was listening to a podcast on the way here by James Greenbanks and Amol Rajan, and the bit that stuck with me is there's no profit in the environment. Everything that we do as farmers, we are effectively cash flowing for government in the hope that we might get 90% of the money back. And while the supposed private sector, but it's a complete Wild West. So we have to keep the pressure and the explanation on government to make them understand why this is so important. I still think the fundamental parts of the farm that we run on the principles of net zero are good business because carbon equals cost. So if we can remove the carbon out of our farming enterprise, we should be more profitable. But I think the harder bit for us is going to be doing the nature bits going forward.
We're now going to play a bit.
Understanding the way nature works.